Next up, we have Michael Bukachi giving a talk titled "Just a Bit More," which I think is about testing. Take it away, Michael.
Thanks, David. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from all over the world. As David mentioned, I'm Michael Bukachi, and I will be taking you through my session, which is titled "Just a Bit More." Okay, let's get started. A bit about me. I am currently I'm the current lead engineer at a company called FarmDrive. We deal with agro farmers, and we help farmers get their produce to the market and vice versa. And that's my Twitter handle at Michael Bukachi. There's a quote, I can't remember where I had it or read it from. It said, Flask lets you do what needs to be done without worrying about how you're going to get it done, which is quite a wordplay, but it is true if you really think about it. Flask is a micro framework. It's some batteries included framework like Django or Fast API or Tornado. It's so small. It has you don't have to think about a lot of things when getting started with Flask. A good example is this is practically a web app. In about, I don't know, less than 15 lines of code, you have a web app running. If you were to navigate to the the page on your local server, you'll see hello. So that's how simple Flask is. I know other frameworks, when you're getting started, the amount of files and directories you have to go through just to make sure that it's up and running, even for a simple page which will just display hello world, it takes a lot. So that's something that actually attracted me to Flask when I was starting out. When I started doing Python programming, Flask just caught my attention. Like, oh, so little very little lines of code, but so much you can do a lot with it. And over the years, I've done a lot with it, from simple web applications to huge systems, which receive millions and thousands of requests at once. From the previous speakers, I've been demoing how they're using Flask to serve a lot of bandwidth, which is quite remarkable. But what about, there's always this thing with Flask. I don't know if it's common in the community. I'm eager to hear it in the comments or from the questions. Whenever you start using a library or framework, there's always this thing of, yeah, it does a lot. It does what needs to be done, but there's always that instance where you need to do something specific that, like, then you have this question like, but what about? So with Flask, okay, when I was starting out, good news is when I started using Flask, I'd have about a lot of but what about questions. But of late, especially over the last 1 year or 2 years, I've been getting a lot of, I can't do this with Flask. What's the best way? Or what workarounds can I apply just to get this done? But then I go switch over to a different framework, for instance, Django or Fast API. I'm like, it's out of the box. But then I think these are some of the trade-offs we usually have to sacrifice when using Flask. But sometimes some of these trade-offs are, is it that it'll put too much in the core framework, or is it that maybe they could be added just to make the process of developing using Flask much easier? I'm going to zero on testing in general using Flask. Good news is Flask offers testing out of the box. It's a first-class citizen in Flask, which is really good news. As you can see, there's a whole page dedicated to testing with Flask. The tool set it brings is it's really mature and comprehensive. You can do what you need to do really quickly and make sure that your app is stable and does what it needs to do according to what specifications or requirements the app covers. Let's take this simple app. It's a simple sample app. It has a couple of routes. There's the hello route. There's a page which redirects back to the index page, and there's one page which is responsible for receiving a file. It takes a post request. And this is a sample configuration of using PyTest. I don't know if it's true, but I've been hearing word on the street that PyTest is the to-go way of testing Python applications in general. It's the recommended way. Um, Coincidence is on the Flask testing website. They actually use PyTest demos. They use PyTest. So I think anyone who's testing Flask and has not heard about PyTest, I think this is a good opportunity to actually try it out and check it out. It has a lot to offer. Yeah, so this is a basic PyTest configuration. Setting up a Flask app, providing it to a different method or fixture, and setting up a client. Take note of the JSON response. We are going to cover that later. But besides that, it's the basic setup of creating a Flask application for testing. And finally, here's the test. Simple and straightforward. You fetch, you do a GET request to the root page, and you assert that the status code received was valid, which is usually 200 or 201. And that's how easy it is to test with Flask. Besides the use of PyTest, I have not used any or added any extra dependency to this sample project. It's just Flask and PyTest, and you're ready to go. You're ready to test your routes, which is really, really convenient. That's a big up to the team that is responsible for maintaining and developing Flask. But web apps get complicated really, 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 really quickly. For a hobby project, it really starts off, or for most projects, it really starts off with a simple page, a simple web app. Nothing is going on. You are basically, you just want to get something running for the MVP really quickly. But things get really complicated really, really quickly. You need to add authentication. You need to maybe support some file uploads. You need to integrate some background jobs. So at this point, you find that a lot of devs tend to to have this question in mind, is Flask really the tool for the job? With all this functionality, is Flask the tool for the job? Good news, yes, most of the time, yes, it is. There's a lot of extensions out there that actually add whatever is needed to an existing app so that you can continue to quickly prototype or work on a project. There's Flask login, Flask security, Flask dance, so many extensions for authentication. Files upload is supported on Flask with a bit of snippets here and there. Background jobs, you can integrate Celery. There's AP scheduler for that. So it's never a lost cause when using Flask. There's a lot of extensions out there. There's a great community that's supporting Flask. As I was saying earlier, Flask already offers testing out of the box, and it has a lot to offer if you need to test cookies or sessions. It offers that if you need maybe to verify state of an application or the state of responses you receive from the application, you can do that already. Looking at this sample, this is an app which needs to test to test the state of a logged in user. Here we have an endpoint where called user, which can only be used by logged in users. With Flask, it's easy. They watch testing for state or dealing with state and applications, which is really, really handy. And the fact that it's out of the box makes it extra super. But then, like everything, it really gets tricky when you begin to do certain things. And these certain things, I'm going to highlight some of them, but it's a really comprehensive list. Good thing is that as development and more people on board the PR or the Flask project, the list is getting smaller, but the list is still there. One thing I noticed when using Flask is, or when interacting with the Flask client, is the parameters you pass to the HTTP methods are ambiguous, for lack of a better word. You can't really know what parameters you can pass and what parameters you cannot pass. In fact, I think most of the time I learned how to use the test client for Flask by reading syntax errors or by going through the source code of the test client. For instance, I think the data parameter, I figured that out after experimenting or after taking taken an example from the requests package. So I just put in data and a dictionary, hoping that it will work, and it actually worked. But besides that, most of the time when going through Flask, especially for someone who's new to the test client, the parameters passed are quite ambiguous. One of them is the allow redirects. This, if for anyone who has used the requests package, whenever you want to handle redirects, you have to pass the allow redirects parameter. However, Flask has something totally different. So coming from from the request background, I used allow redirects. And I ended up getting an error. In fact, almost every time I want to start to test redirection on Flask, I usually tend to start with allow redirects because I keep forgetting, by the way, that's not the parameter. The parameter is actually supposed to be follow redirects. So this is one of the shortcomings of the test client. I did take a peek into the source code of the client, and it turns out that it just takes a generic args and quags parameters, which is really not handy, I would say, especially for someone who's not been using the test client for long. This is, if you look at this slide at the top, this is actually what is in the source code, and it's pretty similar for all other HTTP methods, whether it's get, patch, put, delete, it's the same, which is really hard for someone who's not familiar with Flask or the test client to actually use it without hitting some snags. So maybe improvement in our future PR, like pass the exact, define the method with the exact parameters, so it makes it easy for the IDE to infer what's going on. This is currently I'm not aware if there's a PR or if there's any effort being put in place to actually to make any change to the signatures of the methods. I might do it if I get the courage to actually start contributing to Flask, but currently it's really difficult to actually know what methods you need to, what parameters you need to pass to the HTTP methods when testing routes. Also, still on the topic of another shortcoming of Flask, sorry, is redirects. Currently, as far as I know, it's hard or it's impossible to test redirection, especially when there's more than one redirection. This actually is the workaround I usually use when testing for redirection on Flask. I just check the location of the response to see if the app properly redirected to the right endpoint. This only works in the situations where I need to check for the final result. But in a situation where maybe you have like 3 redirects when you call up a specific route, then currently I don't think there's a way or a simple way of doing it, which is kind of a shortcut. Potential solution, yeah, we could probably have a list somewhere which stores redirects as you go through the pages. I think this snippet is really close to what happens in Django, so I might have borrowed it from there. But yeah, so I think this is something which can be added. Good news is the code is already there. It seems that there's already a list which actually keeps tracks of redirects. So I don't think there's a lot of work which needs to be done to actually improve this functionality. Okay, lastly, some aesthetics. Every time I'm working on a project, I always have to set up like a custom response object to handle specific use cases. For instance, if I need to inspect the content of a page, or if I need to parse the data returned as JSON, or if I just need to verify that it's 200 or it has a status code of 200 or 201. So I ended up like having like a class which I tend to use a lot when checking the responses. You find that it has an okay conflict not found, unauthorized for. It's just aesthetics, I would say. It doesn't really add any functionality to testing. It just makes it easier to read, I think. Don't you think so? As in, it's easier to read okay than status code is equal to 200 or status code is equal to 201. So maybe this might be a future PR to the Flask testing framework. Yeah, as I said, Ali, it's easier to read. And that's just some of the aesthetics and some functionalities or some shortcomings with the current testing framework of Flask. I hope PRs will be raised after this slide of this after FlaskCon, addressing some of these issues. I'm willing to take up some of them. After all, we have a conference here called FlaskCon for all the lovers of Flask, and we should do anything or just a bit more to make the experience and a user developer's experience with Flask even better. And yeah, that's it from me and testing.
Okay, thanks, Michael. That ended a little early, so I didn't solicit questions yet, but if anybody has a question, please let us know on Discord. We'll wait a couple minutes. I will say that the redirect issue that you pointed out is trickier to solve than it sounds. We have an open issue for it, and if somebody wants to tackle that, that would be really cool.
Maybe I might look at it.
It all comes down to backwards compatibility.
Ah, I see.
Do you use any other extensions besides, or do you use any other testing stuff besides just PyTest, or do you usually find PyTest to be sufficient?
Oh yeah, I do. Okay, I wouldn't say they are Flask specific extensions, but I do use a lot of PyTest extensions, from PyTest coverage to PyTest mock for mocking to PyTest mock resources. It's a very handy library I discovered recently, which enables you to actually mock an entire DB or bring up an entire DB using Docker and then bring it down after the test. There's PyTest for testing migrations. That's also another library I discovered. But mostly I would say they're PyTest extensions and not Flask specific extensions. All the extensions I discovered for Flask for testing were either not supported anymore or covered a specific use case. And most of them would require your app to be architectured in a specific way.
I've got another question. Do you find that there's anything that's not useful to test? So for example, like, oh, I could test that the return result is 200, but maybe there's a better thing you could be testing instead or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay, I think I understand. Okay, there are some times where the status code is not really important. You're more interested maybe in what is being returned. For instance, you need to check the structure of JSON being returned. At that point, if the JSON, when the data is returned, we already know that the status code is 200. So at that point, you didn't want to really verify that the status is 200. You'd be more interested in the data being returned in the JSON. Also, sometimes if you have like a chain of tests, you might find that the first test you actually tested the status code. So any test after that, you are really not interested in the status code anymore. You need maybe to test something else, like maybe the structure or maybe the state of the application at some point. So yeah, it really it depends on the situation and what needs to be tested specifically.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions right now, but people are welcome to continue asking on Discord if they think of something later, and definitely go check out Michael's projects and think about the PRs he's suggested. I definitely welcome contributions. So thank you, Michael.